of truth, everywhere present and filling all things, treasury of blessings, and giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our souls, O gracious one. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever. Okay. Actually, before we start, I guess we break out another Bible. Before we start, we could think about what we want to do after this so that we could get ready for it. It's 1 Corinthians 13. So, thoughts about what you would like to explore in the Bible?
I always vote for Psalms, but
Uh-huh.
I think it gets old for people when I say it every time.
I can't remember. We did one?
We have
Psalms?
done some Psalms.
Yeah, there's another booklet in this series on Psalms, so it would be easy to use that. That would be anyway. So Psalms, okay. So other thoughts on what we might read and discuss? I mean, this is your discussion.
Here's
so
an interesting thought that I have,
think.
and it's just a thought, just throwing out brainstorming, right? One of the only, if not the only book of the Bible that is never read from in Byzantine tradition is Revelation.
Right.
And that would be interesting, therefore, to
Yes,
explore it.
right.
We never read it liturgically, but we still read it,
Right.
and it's
Right.
kind of everywhere in our liturgy, really, in some ways.
Uh-huh.
So that might be an interesting thing to explore.
Uh-huh. In the church, up on the ceiling, Jesus is sitting on a great white throne, which is an image in the book of Revelation.
That's right. So many images from Revelation can be found in the church and in the liturgy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Do you have a book on that?
There is actually, yes. Yes. Yeah, we could do a little, I could do a little intro. That would be worth, if we do Revelation, it would be worth doing at least 1 week of introductory remarks about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I actually attended a course on Revelation, not a course really, just it wasn't even like, I think it was just a one-off when I was in college in the Divine Liturgy.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't even making reference to what we call the Divine Liturgy.
That's
what
is in the worship of God. Yeah. Other thoughts on what we might read?
I like that idea, actually.
Revelation?
I was going to say something like Isaiah, but Revelations feature so heavily and intertwine so much with that. That would also work very well.
Right.
One could argue, though, that perhaps one should study Isaiah first.
Well, you could, but that argument would be, there's like at least probably a dozen books of the Bible you should read first before going
that is
to the
true.
book of Revelation, because it's so elusive.
Perhaps the whole Bible.
Yes.
We should study the whole-
Ezekiel, for example, would be another one, and so on. Before our reading is 1 Corinthians 13, but before getting into it, we're talking about what we would do after this, because this is the last session. We're at the last session.
Biblical books or topics that maybe we could discuss for our next one. If anyone has thoughts.
just because you have the text memorized doesn't mean that you might not find it helpful to have the printed version in front of you, perhaps
Especially
in
if
an
it's Father-
alternative translation.
Especially if it's Father Ciro's special edition.
There we go. Okay.
It has more stuff.
I
in
said,
it.
yeah, that's right.
That's for Father Ciro.
Look for the marginal notes. Right? So we're talking about what we might read.
Is there a consensus?
No, there's no consensus.
No consensus.
Are there
It's
even
better than-
suggestions?
There's two
Yes, there are two
suggestions.
suggestions so far.
We should watch a movie next time. We could have movie nights.
Hold that thought. So the suggestions so far are more Psalms and the Book of Revelation. And not
Did you
everyone has,
suggest-
I did, yes.
not everyone has expressed an opinion yet. So,
Well,
our
you like a
opinions would be
challenge.
Well, it was just, we're brainstorming, as I said. It
Yeah.
wasn't,
No, it's good.
so.
I think we should go through more of your books since we are blessed to have the author with us. That
Oh,
doesn't usually
yeah.
happen.
well, there is in this series, there's another second examination of Psalms, another half a dozen Psalms. So we could do that in the series. And there's also one of these booklets on Revelation, so we could do that. So,
Yeah.
but that doesn't answer what part of Scripture you might be interested in exploring.
Any, I don't have a specific.
No specific
Alice,
interest.
do you have a
Yeah.
preference?
My suggestion was
Songs.
Psalms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Revelations would be interesting too.
The Book of Enoch.
You probably
This-
have not read
this
one of these
takes-
about the
raises-
Book of Enoch.
This raises issues of the canon of the Bible.
Enoch
Enoch seems generally to lie outside of that canon for most Christian communions.
Yeah. Though we're not limited to only studying canonical scripture, we can study the fathers, we can study.
Well, okay, we could talk about that.
I mean, there's a lot
Sure.
in the church, that's what we're focusing on.
Sure.
A collaborative study on the compilation of the canon, the historical
Study of the
sources.
canon itself. The formation of the canon.
I'd be down for that.
We could.
And make it devotional.
And make
Okay.
it
We could,
easy.
This
easy.
is why
Okay.
the 5 books, the Torah, shouldn't be in here.
There's literally no
But-
one. Well, I guess there is.
There's always someone
There's
now.
always someone.
Well, there was
What's his name?
what's his name? Marcion, right? Marcion
My book is
dumped
better than all
the
of these.
entire Old Testament,
And
and he dumped Matthew, Mark, and John because there was so much of the Old Testament in them. And he kept Luke,
I do.
except for the first, I dropped the first 2 chapters because they were so elusive to the Old Testament too.
Yeah.
And then he kept Paul's letters and cut out anything else.
That's right.
So these are all well-trod.
Marcy and I do have
Past.
the same favorite gospel.
Luke?
Yeah.
Gotta be careful with that.
Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, he had his pair of scissors there in the Bible, all right, cut and paste.
He had a New Testament account, the life of Jesus, except no miracles.
No miracles. He literally cut them out. That's
He
right.
literally-
Was that 3 pages long?
So- Adam, Elizabeth, any ideas about what we might look at in the Bible and next round, next cycle?
I like both of the suggestions that were put
Yeah,
forth.
okay, yeah.
Psalms or Revelation.
Yeah. Okay,
What are the options?
well, the options are the whole Bible.
Okay, I mean like in your series.
Oh, well, there's a lot. I mean, think of something that you're, I don't know that this has got the entire, no, it doesn't have the whole listing. This was printed
That's
before the
not
whole
even
listing.
complete.
I don't think, although there's some on the front cover and inside the back cover.
Well, they do have
Some of them are
Isaiah.
thematic. Pardon?
I see one of Isaiah.
There is one on a portion of Isaiah. It's on chapters 40 to 55, I think.
You know, at some point, I'd like to do the books on Genesis.
Oh, yeah, in the
We have,
series, yeah,
yeah, we have
Yeah.
one, well, we have one on it, the people books.
Yes,
Abraham
uh-huh.
and Sarah,
right,
Jacob, and then I'm particularly fond of the Joseph. I like the Joseph story.
yeah, Joseph and his
So I
brothers.
find that
Yeah.
very rich.
Yes, yeah.
Did we
How-
Would
finish?
you like to sit?
Pardon?
Did we finish?
No,
No,
We're just getting
we
started.
haven't started yet because we're now on the final session, so we're talking about what we would do.
We may discuss this.
Okay.
So, any thoughts about what you'd like to explore in scripture next? That's what we're,
He gets 2 votes.
No,
No.
it's half a vote,
I was half.
quarter, third.
We should get to
Eight.
this.
we will. But, well, okay, well, so there seems to be,
Well, people can text or email you, right?
yeah, sure, we can continue. At this point, it sounds like there's interest in the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
Seems like the leading candidate. So, yeah. All right, okay.
do you want me to poll the parish generally by email? I can send an email to the parish.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah,
because
sure.
just a thought.
Yeah,
See if we
sure.
can get more people in
Right,
here.
that
Right.
if they
Is that
have
much interest?
some say in what we're talking about, maybe
Yeah.
they'll come.
Think might come, right,
Yeah.
right, yeah, it's a good idea, I think,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so that, we just have a leading idea at this point, and then we, not a choice, and then we have other ideas, like going back to the Psalms, or doing something, I mean, we could do something on the formation of the canon. That'd be more like presentation, and
That might be
give a
good for
little
a
short
one-off.
presentation and a little discussion, maybe not like 6 weeks of it, but
That could be supplementary.
yeah, we could do,
Just do
Yeah.
a one-off.
yeah, we could
on
do
that.
like a one-off in between
Yeah.
sections of the Bible. We could do like one Sunday where we just talk briefly about formation of the Old Testament canon, and another time we could do
Mhm.
another brief formation of the New Testament
It
canon.
might be good if it's tacked on to the study on the book of Revelation, because that was
That
close.
was an issue, sure.
Right,
Hmm.
right,
So make the cut.
right,
That'd be
Right.
interesting.
yes.
Yeshkavu.
You're right. Okay, so, all right, so, let's actually look at our text for today.
Do we have more books?
No, we have no, next time we will order more,
Mhm.
because we ran out this time.
Yeah.
Because different people would drop in on different weeks, and then we would no longer have any, so for sure we'll do more. So we're on page 67. Let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 little subheaded sections for readers to begin. Who wants to start? And then we can just go around.
I could do.
Okay, let me start.
And say what it is, because David doesn't have a book.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah. It's First Corinthians 13, and then followed by 2 little sections from Matthew's Gospel. They're just kind of like enlarged on a couple of points.
So from 1 Corinthians 13,
I'm okay.
how crucial love is. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing.
You have next person with the book, so.
The marks of true love. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoings, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things.
Father John, you're the next person.
Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love.
Alice?
Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't realize you got the book too. Yeah.
Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Then Peter came and said to him, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times. Jesus said to him, Not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so page 69, we have some questions for just beginning to probe the text. We could take these in order. So, first verse of chapter 13, Paul talks about, well, if I do things without love, I'm just like a gong or cymbals. So why is that an apt image for the point that Paul is making? What is it about gongs and cymbals that is making his point here?
The noise is loud, but it lasts for a short time.
Here we go. Okay, it's just a brief thing. Okay,
But it's loud.
but it's loud. It attracts attention, but it's gone almost immediately. Right?
Makes you look good.
Yeah.
I mean, you put your piety out there, your good work.
That's one way to think of it.
Right. You make an impression.
Right.
It makes an impression. Yeah.
Paul didn't like drums and cymbals and gongs.
Pardon?
Paul didn't
Didn't
like drums.
This
and
is another thing which is indicated.
Don't tell the Coptic Church.
Don't tell the Coptic Church or the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans clash cymbals in the creed.
Greek symbols.
Or the Greeks on Easter, the little cups and spoons.
They would say we're having noisy gongs and clanging cymbals with love.
But we should
Without
tell the church of what's happening now.
So, yeah. I like that, what you said, Lance, that it's loud but brief, right? The sound that it makes is over. You know, because he's contrasting tongues later with the things that last. Faith, hope, and love are the things that last.
That's good.
And he says that tongues don't last.
Uh-huh.
Or do they?
Well, he says they don't. He says, as for tongues, they will cease.
They will cease.
Will they begin again is the question. Some people say yes.
Next question. In the first 2 verses, Paul mentions gifts which he wrote about already in chapter 12, and he's going to go on actually and talk about them some more in chapter 14, the next chapter, like tongues and prophecy, and faith, which he's mentioned as in terms of like being a particular gift in chapter 12. So here he mentions giving away your possessions or dying as a martyr. So the question here is, does this correspond to any of the gifts that Paul spoke about in chapter 12? So then one has to take a look at chapter 12, which I think we have the text of. Yeah, back on page 57.
Which verse?
Oh, well, anyway, it's like an open question. So from what Paul says about gifts back in chapter 12, do any of the gifts seem to correspond to this giving away your possessions or dying as a martyr? So the portion of chapter 12 that's on page 57 says, now there are a variety of gifts. So Paul gives not a complete list of all the gifts of the Spirit, but he gives a considerable, string of giftings.
Well, one is to another prophecy, and many of the prophets were killed. Many of the prophets lived like
Right.
ascetics.
Right.
Perhaps that's almost essential to the office of prophet.
Um,
As Jesus says, a prophet is not
accepted in his own town. Right. And so, right, and the prophet being willing to suffer for prophesying is an indication of genuineness. So okay, there's a connection between prophecy as a gift and being willing to die as a martyr. Yes. What about giving away one's possessions?
Some prophets, in order to make the points they have, did some pretty crazy things like building castles and then knocking them down.
Uh-huh.
And John the Baptist in wilderness just eat locusts and wild honey.
Uh-huh. Right.
What possessions did they have, I wonder?
Right.
But beyond prophecy, I'm trying to look.
Well, just mentioning John the Baptist is like there's another connection with prophecies. He's the impoverished prophet, right? He goes off into the desert and has nothing. He doesn't have ordinary clothes or ordinary food.
Part of verse 24, it says, but God has so arranged the body, giving the greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one is honored, all rejoice together with it.
Which connects with
Suffering, it's
oh, right. Uh-huh.
one, if one person suffers, then the whole body suffers.
Right,
If one
right.
rejoices, we all rejoice.
Right. Okay, so all right, so you're right. So by contrast with the person who might want to present themselves as such a noble person because of all that I'm suffering. Say Paul's picture of suffering earlier in chapter 12 is this is something we do together in the body. It's like it's part of a team effort. We don't just suffer as individuals, but it's like part of our life together. If someone is suffering.
We have to be Simon of Cyrene.
Yeah, right, to be Simon of Cyrene, to help one another, to care for one another, right, to bear each other's crosses. Okay, all right, so that's a lot of connections. All right, number 3, judging from Paul's corrections of the Corinthians in earlier chapters, in what ways are the Corinthians lacking in the love that he describes in this reading? This is, looking for reading in context. Often chapter 13 is read out of context. It's like, this is a wonderful thing about love, and you can see what Paul says, love is patient, kind, and so on. I say, well, okay, but it's part of this letter to these people who are having all of these problems learning how to be Christians. So the question is, in what way does this speak to them about the problems they're having becoming Christians?
In chapter 14?
Yeah.
Or anywhere.
Or anywhere, right, anywhere in the book. Like earlier in the book, they're having all of these, there's factions and conflicts. So, or they're going to law, they're litigating each other in court, or well, now I'm giving the examples.
Now you're getting.
I'm not going to do that.
And if you go back to the part where he was talking about how they're celebrating the Lord's Supper.
Okay,
in the
right. Was it
appropriate-
chapter 11?
In the appropriate way,
Right.
Verse 4, where he's talking about love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. I mean,
Yes.
sort of, you had the people who were importing the Corinthians' secular customs
Yeah.
into the celebration
Right.
of the Lord's Supper and
Right.
insisting on, I brought this food, so this is my food. I'm going to share with people who come
Right.
late, or I'm going to insist on having pride of place because that's how other banquets
Right.
work, and we're
Right.
going to sort of insert that into
That's right.
here.
Right.
That love is supposed to be sort of a leveling force, that it gets rid of those social distinctions that they're still
Right.
clinging to.
Right. It's not rude.
Yeah.
Because he says, you're humiliating the poor brother and sister by the way you celebrate the Lord's Supper. It's not that they're going hungry. The problem isn't that they don't have anything to eat. The problem is they don't have anything to eat while other people are feasting and getting drunk. So they're being humiliated. So this love is the opposite of that. Love wouldn't humiliate anyone who's coming to the Lord's Supper. Would honor everybody. So other connections with the earlier instructions in the book, or problems that he's dealing with.
One problem that he mentions he's dealing with is that in chapter 12, verse 2, he says, how when you were pagans, you were constantly attracted and led away to mute idols. In the ancient days, there was such things as understanding of luck and omens and prosperity and things of this nature where, do this and good things will happen to you. Sort of almost the spirit of the book of Proverbs, although it also points beyond itself. But they just pointed this sort of, worship this God and there'll be good luck.
Right.
They will stop the volcano.
Right.
Right. Well, here in the next verse, he says, therefore I tell you that nobody speaking by the Spirit of God says Jesus be accursed, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. He was speaking earlier of how they were attracted and led away. Now there's a singular message coming from the Spirit pointing to Jesus, and they have to deal with that now as Christians. They have to a proper message, not a spirit of the age.
Okay, and then the question is, so this is like part of the earlier discussion of he's got of their previous attitudes before they became Christians. So the question now is, as we're reading chapter 13, is there a connection between what he's saying about love and that earlier point that he was making? In this case, his earlier point about idolatry and bribing the gods to get good responses from them.
The connection is that Jesus is love.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. For sure.
No one is going to say by the Spirit, love is accursed.
Right, that's true too. Right. Okay, good.
Well, a very obvious connection is in Corinthians 2:21, Paul says, "Let no one boast about human leaders." And here in verse 4, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant. And so, I don't know, it kind of makes me wonder. Kevin and Adam and I were discussing on the way over just sometimes how, I think we were talking about liturgy wars in the church, and talking about how sometimes people just seem to enjoy getting into arguments, just almost about these things just for the sake of arguing. And so I think that Paul's message here is kind of, just being patient, kind, approaching these things without being envious, boastful, arrogant, or insisting on your own way or the rightness of,
Mhm.
Something that's
Mhm.
perhaps not all that important in the long run.
Well, and if they're boasting of leaders,
Yes.
it's like, well, I'm part of this group, and the person that's like the representative, the big figure in this group is so and so, Apollos or whoever,
Yeah.
and so I'm a bigger deal because I'm part of this group that's got higher status because of the leader.
Yeah.
So that's got really nothing to do with loving anybody.
My spiritual
Nothing.
father can beat up your
Your spiritual
father.
father. Oh, great, right. Let's put them in a cage and have them do it. I mean, yeah, what has this got to do with love? Nothing.
This sounds like a discussion I heard just before coming in here where Victor and Miguel, I guess, used to get into some fist fights. Miguel ended up with a pretty good scratch in his eye years ago.
Oh,
He went to school and they had to explain what happened.
it wasn't my parents.
No child abuse.
Right, no child abuse. It's fraternal
It was
abuse.
sibling abuse.
Oh, yeah, okay, so, yeah, where are we for time? Yeah, so well, let's, let's look at the questions for connecting all of this with our lives, page 72. So from, one's own experience, who might we identify as having been for us an example of the kind of love that Paul talks about here in chapter 13? And what have we learned from this person?
I don't know if I'm going to answer exactly this question, but I was thinking of Father John's homily. And that sometimes you do nothing, and sometimes love requires that you do things. That, like Paul, is actually kind of humiliating some of the people in the group by pointing this stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
That's from his love for them,
Mm-hmm.
trying to bring them to Christ.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's a hard thing to decide when you don't do anything and when you do something.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I don't think that's an easy thing.
Yeah. And then also in the New Testament, there's 2 Corinthians, which is even more, there's even more like spirit kind of conflict going on between Paul and the Corinthians.
They didn't listen the
Dealing-
first time, so wait, there's
wow.
more.
There's more, right. So he says, you wait till I come. Into discussion of the homily today. I guess in connection with 1 Corinthians 13, it's like, so when is love kind of waiting on the Lord, and when is love
The
stepping
Lord
forward
waiting
and
on
taking
you.
action? Or how do we think about this in terms of love? We have the homilist
Well,
here
yeah,
to
I mean,
offer his thought on this.
I'll tell you some of my thoughts. I mean, one of the things I said in the homily, of course, is that the enemy I'm talking about is not your neighbor. That, it's and that's, I think, an important, it's not do nothing with regard to loving your neighbor that I'm talking about. It's do nothing with regard to, people will have a tendency to fight fire with fire, fight evil with evil, do evil in the attempt to, prevent what they see as a greater evil or something. That's what I'm talking about. Is that's not the way. Doing nothing with regard to evil. That's what I was talking about more so than not other people.
Mm-hmm. But evil is through people.
Sometimes.
Yeah, so I think it's a very difficult thing. I mean, my guess is a lot of times waiting is a very important thing.
Yes.
So that you don't make it worse. And then how do you decide when the point is that you are supposed to do something?
Some people say sometimes it's even a sin to do nothing, that there are sins of omission just as there are sins of commission.
There certainly are.
When do you wait too long? You know, Pope Honorius, there was some group of heretics, I forget which, and he never dealt with them during his lifetime. So they declared him as anathema after he died for never doing anything.
We won't go into Honorius here.
Or post-mortem anathemas.
Right.
Well, having raised this particular question about love, then we could take this first question and say, are there examples from our experience or from people that we've known of someone who has had good timing and a good sense of when an evil should be kind of allowed to run its course, or when it needs to be confronted in a loving way? Someone needs to be confronted in a loving way or something. Do we have experience with this?
One small example pops into mind. It's very small in a way, but it wasn't small to the person involved. I forget the particulars. You might have to correct me. But, it was a husband and wife, friends. These are all friends of ours, this whole group. Husband and wife whose son, young son, had fallen into a pond and been retrieved, but not before he had extensive brain damage. And so he was just basically, just not responsive. He was in a wheelchair and everything, but for the rest of his life. So, we were with a circle of people who believed in the power of prayer and the power of healing. So people, well-meaning people came up and, said they wanted to pray with him, and he didn't respond. So this went on for some time, and meanwhile the parents
Years. Sometime meaning years.
It went on for years. But meanwhile, some of the people who were doing the praying were not doing it in a very sensitive way. And beyond that, they also blamed the parents explicitly for saying they didn't have enough faith, and that was why their son was not being healed. So the one incident where the mother of this son told us this years after he died, he said one thing that was really important for her is that there was a group of people, a woman came up and made this comment to the mother at one point, and about, well, you don't have enough faith, that's why your little boy is not getting better. And a friend of ours, who is kind of a mild-mannered looking, meek woman, usually just responded with the fury of a prophet, almost, just really saying this is not right, and just read her the fact on why this was not right and this wasn't a good thing to do. And Anne knew how to speak up in that situation, and years later the mother still remembered it as something that had really been of great help and value to her. So I thought that was kind of, God can inspire you in many ways, but I felt like that inspired outburst of anger, righteous anger, was really right on. Yeah. And it was very out of character for this particular woman.
With the people who were praying with her son, they almost remind me of Job's friends. With friends like these, who needs enemies?
Yeah, that's right. You're only making it worse for me. Right.
I mean, there are bigger examples that other people can come up with. That's the one that flashed into my mind.
That's a good one.
It's all the more powerful in your story.
Yeah.
In that it does come from a meek person.
Yeah.
That gives it
Yeah.
a greater power.
Yeah. Meek is probably one of the first words I would use to describe the outward affect of this person.
Coming from someone who's always boisterous and with outbursts all the time, such a thing would not have
Not at
that
all.
effect
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
Oh, don't listen to that person.
Yeah.
They're always
There's
arguing
blowing
anyways.
it off there,
Right.
blowing a gasket.
He's a railer.
Yeah, right.
Just about this first question as a whole, who has been an example of the kind of love that Paul describes? I mean, honestly, maybe it's my age, and maybe it's the fact that I've been going to the funerals of many people who lived well and died well. But I feel like, yeah, I can think of a lot of people whose life exemplified patience, kindness, love, hope. And a lot of the people I think of are people who maybe played a background role in life. Like the people sometimes you see in scripture, like they're not named, but they're in the background doing stuff that enables the story to move on. Like I guess we called them during the time of COVID essential workers. But there's a
We didn't
certain
treat them
kind of
like essential
hidden
workers.
kindness and patience and yeah. So I experienced patience, for example, from my husband, because I'm losing my hearing. And when he has to shout, just the very act of shouting, he told me some time ago, makes him angry. Not the fact that he has to yell, not the fact that
It's like the reverse engineering of anger. I don't feel angry, but if I have to shout at you, then I
Yeah.
start feeling angry because I'm shouting.
Yeah, it's like that. But anyway, so but I experience a lot of patience from Kevin, for example, and I think.
I thought you were honoring the deceased.
Oh. Well, I moved from the deceased to
see.
the,
Okay,
like
right.
one of the essential hidden workers. I mean, people can respect you for many things, but you probably don't know how much patience he has to exercise in his marriage.
We need to move on.
Take it as a birthday gift. Today he turned 75.
Oh.
Well, let's see, what about the second question? What situation has been especially important for your learning what it means to love? And how has what you learned in this situation affected your life?
Well, you could share something.
Well, I'm going to keep my mouth shut at the moment. We have the talking.
It's like he's got the teacher's book with all the answers.
Yeah, the answer key at the end.
I would say my grandmother was incredible at being able to see through all the junk, the mistakes that we make, and just be very accepting. And she's like a role model for me on just accepting people as they are, seeing through all the junk that they're doing. That's crazy. Like, all the mistakes we made growing up. She was always a place you could just sit and you knew she loved you. She might not always be happy with you, but she was really good at that. And I have really met very few people who are as good at that as she was.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something I really think about of trying to be able to do. And it's not an easy thing.
Yeah, that's good.
Accept you without accepting your actions.
Do you think she saw God in everyone?
I never really thought of her as a real religious person younger. But somehow she seems like she was very close in that way of being able to see that.
Father John once gave a homily a while ago about how God works even in those who do not believe in him.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, what situations in our own lives have been like learning experiences for us? Opportunities to discover what it really means to love.
This is a very long story, but I'll cut it short. Beating depression, like clinical depression, was very instrumental for me in learning how to love. Because when all you see is misery in the world, it's hard not to react to that misery with the same misery.
Mm-hmm.
That was instrumental for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
learning to love as a way of overcoming depression.
Yes, and vice versa.
Overcoming depression
As a means to learn to love.
as a means to learning to love.
Uh-huh.
I think both are related.
Yeah.
It's good.
It's interesting, Lance, that you ask about, seeing God and there are many people who I consider more religious than my grandmother, but they don't show that love.
Mhm.
And I just never even thought about it until you said
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
So maybe they would be even worse if they didn't have that religion. I don't know. Or maybe it's not
Maybe they'd be
bringing them
better.
to the right place. I don't know. It's interesting.
Can ask
Next
if
question. Pardon?
Can ask if anybody wants. to answer any.
Yeah, we have several other questions here. Anybody want to pick up on one of them? On 72 and 73 here. You don't have the questions in front of you.
We don't.
1, 2. Oh. There's the question. The boasting and stuff, something that came to mind earlier is I remember when we lived in Jackson, there was a man who was part of a church in Ann Arbor.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, he always wanted to tell me about this prophet there that was like the third leading prophet in the world or something like this. It was just like, who came up with that?
Who's the first?
Yeah.
And how did they score that high?
It made no
What's the
sense to
metric?
me. But on the other hand, going back to the first question, my greatest example of somebody enduring with patience is somebody I met who lived north of Jackson about 7-8 years before we moved there, and became much closer with him when we moved there. There were some strange things that the previous owners of our house did in that house, and we just felt some real uneasiness. And Father Roman came, a couple of the nuns from Holy Door Mission Monastery, and blessed our house. And it was like things just changed in the blinking of an eye. It was just like you could see in every room, and this is like 2,200 square foot house. And he put the sign of the cross on every room and several places in some of the rooms. It made a huge difference. But when I first met him, the first time I met him, we went for a walk out to the cemetery at the monastery. He was telling me how he was in prison for 11 years in Romania for being a Christian. And his older sister, who was the abbess of the monastery, told me later he was beaten up so much that he doesn't remember. He was actually in prison for 13 years. And I remember him telling me, like, they put him in solitary confinement for 6 months thinking that this was going to break him down. And he said, when you were made in the image and likeness of God, and when all you have is yourself, you go inside. And he said he drew so close to the Lord during that time. When they took him out after 6 months, he knelt on the ground and kissed the ground and cried because he'd grown so close to the Lord. And there's a documentary where I think the guy who did the documentary is actually from Allen Park. And he asked him about this of how could you forgive those who beat you and did this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, I think of Jesus on the cross, forgive them for they know not what they do.
Beautiful answer.
Well, what about question 4? Oh, you're going to say something?
Well, I have
Sorry,
a
go
thought. I don't know if it's not really in response to the question. It's in response to the verses.
Oh, well, good.
That the
Oh, give
question
it a try.
That's more important.
Straight from the book.
that refer to it, but it's not in response to the question really. Because, these verses make it some kind of hard to understand what love is. Especially the third verse for me. I can see pretty clearly the distinction between speaking in tongues and love, and the first verse, and the gift of prophecy and the knowledge, in the second verse. But verse 3 practically, in some ways, reads like a definition of love. A definition of love.
Mhm.
If I give away everything that I own,
Mhm.
which, what would motivate that except for love? And if I hand my body over, well, it says so that I may boast. Now that's interesting. That's a translational issue too. There's different translations of that. But so that I may boast is interesting. At least, unless my memory is just off the charts here, wrong. But I've heard that if I hand my body over to be burned,
That's what this one says.
yeah, that's the translation that I'm more familiar with. I don't know why. But do not have love, I gain nothing. So to me, that feels like, self-sacrifice. And Jesus says there is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friend. But Paul is saying, well, you can do this without love, because he's saying you can do that, but if you do not have love, you gain nothing. I mean,
Because pretty much all of those things can be replaced with self-love. All of it can be
That's it,
motivated
yeah.
by self-love, which completely cancels out all other love.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think there's a manuscript. I don't have a full notes here, but I think with so that I may boast. I think there's different readings of the word.
Mm-hmm.
So one reading is so that I may be burned,
Right.
and the other is so that I may boast.
Right.
Yeah, so that gets in.
This translation here says, and if I even let them take my body to burn it.
Yeah,
Right.
right. Anyways, the issue is like,
Motivation.
yeah, it's motivation. So it's like, so the action itself
Yeah.
is
Like Rachel
not love.
said,
It has to
really.
do with the motive,
Yeah.
right? Why am I doing this?
Right.
No matter how extreme it is. That seems to be Paul's point.
Mm-hmm.
Could this be referring to something like maybe suicide or something?
Possibly. That was my thought.
Because then you'd be.
Well, I don't know. Handing over the body is maybe doesn't. I'm not sure that could be an idiom for taking one's own life. I don't think. I don't. But it might be worth exploring, but I'm not sure.
Or suicide by the mob. Get them mad enough to burn you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably sometimes something that people do, right?
It is.
Yeah.
That's what the Romans speculated about the Christians who were dying in the circuses, that they would speak up and declare themselves Christians just because they really did not like living.
Yeah. So that would be a serious misreading of their motives.
Yes.
Yeah.
In some cases, although there were some heretical groups really that did sort of rush to martyrdom with the
Right.
sense of with yeah.
Did you hear about the crazy guy who stole a train? They say he had a locomotive.
Thank you, Lance.
Makes me want to look at the clock. Well, so what is this leads into thinking about, okay, so love has something to do then with motive. So what is it? I mean, Paul doesn't give a definition of love here, right?
He
kind of
attributes of it.
Attributes. So the things like,
of his
you kind of,
patient
if you personify love, what does love do? But it doesn't, this issue of motive leads into a thinking about, so what is love? It has something to do with motivation, but obviously
Well, I think
that's
it's
not a full picture.
I think it's a question, sometimes I think about it in terms of, Martha and Mary. I mean, I know there are a lot of different ways to look at the passage and, but sometimes I think it's this like when does how do love and your sense of duty interact? You know, we've probably all seen people. I have seen people, and sometimes I've acted this way myself. You do something because you know it's the right thing. You really don't want to do it. You're doing it out of a sense of duty, and you're not doing it with joy, and you're not especially doing it for the Lord. You're just doing it because it's part of your role, or because you're expected to do it, or whatever. So you're doing it. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that you're doing. The action is objectively good, but you're just doing it, because it's your duty.
And
So
some people will
is
let
there?
you know that they're just doing it because it's their duty.
And that's another, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh, see how duty I am, yeah, uh-huh.
So is that love?
Well, that's
Is
what, that raises
Is
the
that
question,
devoid of
right?
love? I mean,
It's love for what you think is right. Maybe not love for your neighbor.
yeah. You can tell the difference, I think, sometimes when you look at
Yes.
people. Like I think of one of my parents' neighbors who, a married man, his wife got early onset Alzheimer's. And this man was just so, and she became unpleasant, really unpleasant. But he was just so loving and devoted to her. You could tell this guy was not doing this out of a sense of duty. I mean, there was duty, yes, he was married to her. But there was love in how he treated her. And I've seen other situations of people in similar circumstances where it seemed to be, at least outwardly to me, it was like duty prevailing,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, is doing something. I think it's hard to know what the line is exactly.
I think we'll know it when we see it. I think love is itself an operation of God. We share in his love through our human nature, to which has been accorded love, which originates in God. It's something that he will not take away from us. If he did that, what kind of loving God would he be? But he has given us this love intrinsically. I was going to say, I greatly enjoy your dichotomy between love and a sense of duty. I think both can be present, and sometimes it's one or the other. One time I think it was one or the other was when they put Jesus on the cross. These people who were teachers of the law, they knew their duty so well, they knew what they had to do, they knew it was right, but there was no love in putting Christ on the cross.
I am sometimes rather dutiful rather than loving in my giving. I have a lot of opportunity to give in what I, in my role. If I give away everything that I own, I can even give away things that other people own in my role. It's kind of a weird role that I have. But tell Katie that a lot. This is a weird job. So for example, I get a lot of calls for assistance, which now we have the St. Nicholas apostolate, which it helps provide, funding so I can answer some of these, not all of them, but some of these calls for assistance. And many times I don't want to. It's very inconvenient.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very
Tedious.
and sometimes the people are,
Questionable.
just remarkably ungrateful.
Yes.
Which, like conceptually, philosophically, so much the better from where I'm sitting. I was like, that's awesome, they don't even,
More points for the other life if they're on.
Right, yeah, but it's like I'm collecting points then, right? It's
Right.
It's like, it's out of, the same thing, you know, I joke with my children, I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about this, but you know, like what you see these street corner people who, you know, hold a cardboard sign and ask for money. I always give them something. And I always tell my children, I've got to do this because this is my retirement plan. I'm going to be trading places with them, so I need to give to them now. Because later I will be relying on people giving to me in that situation. But it's like, but there's kind of this feeling, well, also I have this sense that, well, Jesus has told me to do this, just period, you know, it's like, give to those who ask is a commandment as I see it, you know, and it's like, so, okay. But it's sometimes I do it, I don't know, my father drilled into me that love is not a feeling, that love is not an emotion, you know, there are nice emotions that go with it sometimes, but sometimes don't, and whether they're there or they're not doesn't tell you whether or not it's love. That was the message that he taught me.
So that's the merit of duty, that you'll still go through with things when you don't feel.
Yeah, that's right. And so sometimes it is with feeling. I've had emotional experience too, giving in these situations, and I've made real connections with people, you know, weeping and everything, you know, also, but a lot of times that's not the case, but that doesn't, I don't know, that doesn't invalidate the times when when there isn't the feeling. I don't feel like those are, that I still have there's something real about it.
I had a funny experience recently with a corner peddler. You know, I've been trying to get more into the habit of having cash on hand for those occasions. And a couple days ago, I've gotten there. I'm at the front of the line, you know, right at the beginning of the red light. So it's like the perfect opportunity to have the time to actually give someone something. And I look at my wallet and realize I don't have anything in it.
Oh no.
And so I thought, there's got to be something to look around. And I realized there's half a pack of cigarettes in my truck. Okay, so I look out the window and say, hey, I don't have anything, but do you want the cigarette? And her face just brightened up. She's like, yeah. And I thought, you know, this may not have been the most helpful thing that anyone has done for her today.
It might have been.
But you know,
at the same time, you still took the time to talk to her and treat her like a person.
I do notice that sometimes it's like it's easier to make a good impression with people who are, you know, on harder times because they aren't asking for that much. And anything you take the time to give them, they typically seem to be pretty grateful people, actually.
He's taking it.
But I thought that was I just had to laugh. This unexpected experience.
But part of it is, like you're saying, it's not just, oh, cigarette, that's a good idea, but it's like, oh, there's something more personal about this. Like, it's just, here's $1 or something, and I'm driving away.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I have this, you might like this. There's something personal about it.
Yeah, and as I drove away, I saw in the rearview mirror she was lighting.
She must have needed it at that moment.
Yeah, well, she had a lighter. I should have offered her one. She already had one.
Okay, we're at the end of our time here. So usually we spend 2 weeks on a session, but I don't know if we to come back to this one again.
You already
we have.
Would it be anticlimactic or would it be helpful? Since you've already announced the end of this.
Yeah, I feel like we're done. What do you all think?
We're ready to say amen.
So I'm out of town next Sunday. Is it work for us to meet 2 Sundays from today?
Probably.
Because if so, we could try to have something else in place.
We had another session scheduled
for this, right?
Right.
Uh-huh.
But that was for next Sunday, so that
Oh, I
you
see.
can't
I
come,
mustn't
so
have gotten back to you about, yeah, I had
That's
to go out of town.
This coming Sunday, I'm going on a trip, so I won't be missing anything.
Okay.
So it might be erroneously in the bulletin for next Sunday.
Oh,
So sorry about that.
oh, that's my fault.
No, I don't know, maybe, but I don't know whether I missed the communication or whatever, but that's okay.
The people,
I'll just announce it.
the people who would come here, now they'll have to stay at coffee hour.
That's right.
The worst punishment.
Good sentence.
So, would it work, Father John, for us to meet 2 weeks from today?
I think so.
Okay, so that could be the beginning of something new, and we'll try to work out what that will be and
Mhm.
and get the books for it
Yeah,
over the next 2 weeks then.
yeah.
Okay. All right, so, and if you have any further thoughts about this, email me if you've got my email address, or email Father John.
It's in the parish
And,
directory too.
My email?
Mine is.
Oh, okay, all right,
Yours
or
might be
email
too.
Louise or me, if you have further thoughts.
Good.
It looks like we may be trending towards Revelation, but. So,
One of the hardest books to interpret.
Mhm.
yes, it is. It is.
I remember being at a Melkite clergy
Yes.
conference, and
You're gonna have a lot to say
there was a
about
priest who
Revelation.
did a very nice explanation of it. And I
Uh-huh.
remember I ran into him years later, and I thought it was all like from Eastern Orthodox or Catholic sources, and he
Uh-huh.
says the bulk of it, I think it was, and he was in the seminary that he picked up,
Uh-huh.
he learned from a Protestant or something.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah, sometimes
You
it's
are.
right.
There are some very good Protestant
Yeah.
commentators on the
Yeah.
Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
They understand how the apocalyptic writing works, and they very erudite as far as noticing and understanding and interpreting all of the scriptural allusions, which just like fill the whole book.
Right.
And so, yeah, so some of them can be a very helpful guide for
Yeah.
Revelation. Okay, well, thank you again for a stimulating conversation.
Thank you, this is.
For
good.
me, like many Christians, it was the first book I ever read.
Was it?
Of the Bible.
Of the Bible?
First book of the Bible.
Yeah,
that I ever
uh-huh.
read,
Oh,
yeah.
uh-huh.
Which is, of course, a terrible place.
As a kid, you're like, which is the one that has dragons in it?
Yeah,
so-
exactly. It's like very appealing. But then it's like, what is going on with all of this?
I know people who read it while they were smoking weed.
Yeah.
I did that.
Yes.
I did that. But we
Yeah.
called it grass.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's one way to get inspired.
Well,
That was not
we
the
probably won't recommend that.
That's not what the Bible discussion will be like.
No.
On November 12th.
We'll keep the lights
Or
on.
maybe we'll do the canon discussion on November. Is that too, or is that too much to?
Well, we could. Yeah, if you want to like
The idea of
in
doing
between
a-
sessions.
Doing
do-
an in between.
Okay, we could do.
An intertestamental session.
Okay, and
Call it a one-off.
in the interstices, we will have
Yeah.
an no,
I don't know, but
okay, we
the
could do
idea
that.
is, because I wanted to
Yeah.
email the parish
Okay,
about
what we do.
what we do.
Okay, so in 2 weeks, we could have, instead of a regular discussion,
Right.
I could make some remarks on the formation of the Old Testament canon.
Yeah.
And we could have some discussion of that as we go along. That would be
I liked
a
that.
break
idea.
and
Yeah.
we change the pace.
Yeah.
Okay, let's plan on that.
Okay.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will get
You're gonna go on somewhere?
Why is our Old Testament different from the Bible of Judaism?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
that's one of the big questions.
And Protestantism
It's for-
and
Right.
Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
There's three different.
Oh, I think that
The
must be.
the Orthodox have some additional material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So that would be interesting
That
to
sounds
learn
like
about what,
It is.
what's
For sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Not so much. I think we have grandkids who are.
Oh.
They would like to show us their costumes.
And then sometime later, we could do a single session on the formation of the New Testament canon. Come back to Marcion to talk about
Right.
the part he played.
Paging Thomas
We do.
Jefferson.
Oh, Thomas Jefferson. Well, we had the canon a long time before he came along. Okay, good.
Okay.